If you think the book of Revelation was written to you, then you will never understand it. And if you, even for a moment, think that Revelation mentions Apache attack helicopters, then you have no idea what the whole book is about. Just like every other book in the Bible, the book of Revelation has its own original audience. And to make that very clear, John addresses the book to 7 real flesh and blood churches in the region of Turkey. Here's a simple rule to understand the book of Revelation, or indeed any book of the Bible. If you come up with an interpretation that the original audience could not have come up with, then it's wrong. That's it. Give up that interpretation. For example, if you believe the United States of America is Babylon the Great in the book of Revelation, then that's not a possible interpretation because the original audience had never heard of America. Here's another example. If you think that the mark of the beast is a microchip, then you are almost certainly not correct because the original audience had not heard of microchips. If the original audience could not have come up with a certain interpretation, then neither can we, because the book of Revelation was meant for them to understand it and not for us. They had all the keys that they needed to understand the book of Revelation. The only way that we can have any keys to understand Revelation is by getting into the original audience's heads. Another example, could AI be the image of the beast that both talks and then causes people to worship the beast and then be killed if they don't? AI cannot be the fulfillment of this because the original audience would not have come to that conclusion, and therefore neither can we. Now, I'm sure I've already lost many of you because the idea of interpreting an ancient text in its own ancient context is very controversial these days. People make millions of dollars by saying that the book of Revelation unlocks this secret technology and the secret code to understanding the United States of America or Russia or China or any other thing like that. And you don't make a lot of money by pointing out the obvious and saying, hey, let's just read this in context. Well, how do I know that the original audience had a better shot at interpreting the book of Revelation than we do? Well, here's an example of something that the original audience would have readily understood, but something that we struggle with. In Revelation chapter 8, we read that there is silence in heaven for about a half hour after the final seal has been opened. This has stumped many commentators, and people really just offer out guesses in the dark about what this really means. But I'm here to propose that the original audience that is familiar with Old Testament practices would have been very much aware of what exactly this represents. To understand this, we need to go to chapter 1 of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel sees a number of living creatures with 4 different heads known as cherubim. As an important side note for this video, some people actually think that this vision in Ezekiel chapter 1 is about an alien spaceship. They believe this because they see metal and they think of a spaceship, and then they see fire and they think of jet engines, and the whole thing is like a really wacky way of looking at Ezekiel 1 that has nothing to do with how the original audience would have understood the text, which I'm sure many of you would think such an interpretation is crazy. And you would be right. We should not impose modern technology onto Ezekiel 1, just as we should not impose modern technology onto the Mark of the Beast. People who say that the Mark of the Beast is a microchip are just as outlandish as those who think that Ezekiel 1 is about an alien spaceship. And when they went, I heard the sound of their wings like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army. When they stood still, they let down their wings. Based on this text, we actually see the development of a Jewish tradition that says that the cherubim actually sing praises and worship to God through the movement of their wings. They believe that as these living creatures move their wings, voices of praise are sung to God. And you might be thinking, well, that's kind of weird, that's a little bit crazy, but these Jewish commentators actually went even further by saying that they sometimes move their wings and then sometimes stop. And they started reasoning about why do they sometimes stop singing praises to God? Jews also went to Psalm 42:8, which says, "By day the Lord commands his steadfast love, and at night his song." They interpreted his song as the music of the angels in heaven praising him. Since stars in the sky were believed to be angels, it makes perfect sense that the psalmist takes the night as the time when angels are singing their praise. It's at night when you see stars in the sky, therefore it would be very natural to think that at night the angels sing their praises. Again, this is just another one of those things that makes sense to the readers at the time, but doesn't really make sense to us now. So the next time you read about stars in the book of Revelation, you are better off thinking about angels than fiery nuclear balls of gas in space. They didn't know what stars were in the ancient world. So when you see star, don't think about what we think about when we see star. But what does all this have to do with the silence in heaven for a half hour? You see, Jews read texts like Psalm 42 as follows: "The angels praise God during the night, but then they stand still and are silent during the day. Why? Because otherwise the praises of Israel, as they are offering praises towards God, could not make it through the praises and shouts of the angels. So the angels have to be quiet in order for God to properly be able to hear the praises of the Israelites. I know this is a very foreign concept. We don't think the way they did, but this is how Jews read this text. They believed that the angels stopped singing praises in order for the prayers of the saints to be heard. Other Jewish texts speak about how God commands Ezekiel's cherubim to be silent once a day as well, so that God can hear the prayers of Israel. One Midrash states that when Israel says the Shema, angels are silent until Israel's praise is completed. In fact, I won't bore you with all the quotations, but suffice to say, the idea that angels stop praising God in order for the Israelites' praise to be heard is very well attested in Second Temple literature. This is a very common idea that would have been natural to the Jews, even though it's not natural at all to us. We don't think in these terms. So then when we get to Revelation 8, the meaning becomes absolutely clear. The reason why the angels are silent for about a half hour is so God would have time to hear the prayers of the saints, the very prayers that have just been offered on the incense altar. And in the Old Testament, the offering of incense was often seen to aid the prayers of the faithful as they prayed towards God. So this too is built on the assumption that incense offers prayers towards God, which only secures the interpretation. So while modern commentators often have no idea why there's silence for a half hour, the ancient Jewish reader would have instantly known what this is about. And therefore, this is just one example to show that they had the keys to understand Revelation, that we have to do work to understand where they're coming from, but they just naturally got it. This is just one of many examples in the book of Revelation where the ancient audience would have understood the text, but we're just left scratching our heads. We think the book of Revelation is about geopolitics and with Russia and the UN and America and China and all these different factions, when in reality, the ancient reader wouldn't have seen any of that. And if they wouldn't have seen any of that, perhaps we're just imagining that Revelation says things that it doesn't really say. Now, if you want to force Revelation to talk about current events, then be my guest. I can't stop you. But you might as well give up on understanding the book of Revelation.